Well, once again tonight, Brett Kavanaugh has broken sharply with the tradition of Supreme Court nominees and has decided to make another public statement outside of the Judiciary Committee hearing room, which is usually the only place that we ever hear from a Supreme Court nominee. Brett Kavanaugh's first break with tradition was to go on the Rupert Murdoch-owned Fox News channel to defend himself against Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's accusation that he sexually assaulted her and tried to rape her with his friend Mark Judge while they were all in high school. It was a strange performance on Fox News that raised more questions than it answered and was the first time that Brett Kavanaugh lied about the drinking age in Maryland being 18 when he was an 18-year-old senior in high school. Tonight, Brett Kavanaugh has taken to the op-ed page of the Rupert Murdoch-owned Wall Street Journal to offer an explanation for his tone in last week's Judiciary Committee hearing, which was criticized today in unprecedented remarks by John Paul Stevens, one of America's 4 retired justices of the Supreme Court who are still with us. Justice Stevens's comments about Brett Kavanaugh's complete collapse of judicial temperament in that hearing might have been the final trigger that forced the White House strategists to deliver Brett Kavanaugh's op-ed piece to the Wall Street Journal tonight. Let's listen to what retired Justice Stevens said today in Florida about what he saw in the hearing room last week. And this came today when Justice Stevens was speaking. It came right after extended praise that he offered for Brett Kavanaugh's years as a federal appeals court judge. In fact, Justice Stevens was especially pleased that Brett Kavanaugh approvingly cited Justice Stevens's dissent in the Citizens United case in an opinion that Judge Kavanaugh wrote that Justice Stevens fully supports. So after describing his admiration for Judge Kavanaugh's work and saying he is a fine federal judge, those were his words, a fine federal judge, Justice Stevens then said this.
But I think that his performance during the hearings caused me to change my mind. I think there's several commentators, Larry Tribe among them, who's a constitutional law professor at Harvard, have written pieces in which they suggest that he has alienated he has demonstrated a potential bias involving enough potential litigants before the court that he would not be able to perform his full responsibilities. And I think there's merit in that criticism, and that the senators should really pay attention to it for the good of the court. It's not healthy to get a new justice that can only do a part-time job.
John Paul Stevens was a lifetime Republican when he was appointed to the Supreme Court by Republican President Gerald Ford. Republican Senator Jeff Flake was also bothered by Brett Kavanaugh's histrionics at the hearing.
I was very troubled by the tone of the remarks. And it went on, and the interaction with the members was sharp and partisan, and that concerns me. And I tell myself, you give a little leeway because of what he's been through. But on the other hand, we can't have this on the court. We simply can't.
And tonight, Brett Kavanaugh is promising that we won't have this on the court. Writing in the Wall Street Journal, he is saying that the person we saw in the Judiciary Committee last week will not be the person we see on the court. Brett Kavanaugh wrote, "Going forward, you can count on me to be the same kind of judge and person I have been for my entire 28-year legal career, hardworking, even-keeled, open-minded, independent, and dedicated to the Constitution and the public good." Brett Kavanaugh's op-ed piece arrived at the end of a day in which North Dakota Democratic Senator Heidi Heitkamp announced that she was voting against Brett Kavanaugh for 2 reasons. First, she believes Christine Blasey Ford, and second, she believes that Brett Kavanaugh's tone and behavior in the hearing room last week demonstrated that he is not fit for the United States Supreme Court. We will have more about Senator Heitkamp's decision later in this hour. Brett Kavanaugh did not apologize for his conduct in the hearing room last week. Instead, he offered words of explanation without an apology. saying, "I was very emotional last Thursday, more so than I have ever been. I might have been too emotional at times. I know that my tone was sharp, and I said a few things I should not have said. I hope everyone can understand that I was there as a son, husband, and dad," which leaves open the question, what are the things that you should not have said? One of the most alarming things that Brett Kavanaugh did say was actually in his written opening statement. It was premeditated, and it was when he plunged into a right-wing Rush Limbaugh conspiracy theory.
This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2016 election, fear that has been unfairly stoked about my judicial record, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, and millions of dollars in money from outside left-wing opposition groups. This is a circus, and as we all know, in the United States political system of the early 2000s, what goes around comes around.
And the man who wrote that, the man who announced very proudly that he personally wrote that statement himself, word for word, tonight has a piece allegedly written by him in the Wall Street Journal that says, "At times, my testimony, both in my opening statement and in response to questions, reflected my overwhelming frustration at being wrongly accused. My statement and answers also reflected my deep distress at the unfairness of how this allegation has been handled." And so the Trump White House authorized a desperate last-minute explanation for the conduct that Justice Stevens today found disqualifying for the Supreme Court, a court that he served on for 34 years, conduct that Jeff Flake objected to. But because this is the Donald Trump White House, of course, there is no apology in the op-ed piece. Donald Trump would not allow an apology. And so, is this what Jeff Flake needs? Will this work for Republican Senators Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski? A promise by Brett Kavanaugh of who he will be, as he put it, going forward. We're supposed to see that in a confirmation hearing, who this person will be going forward. That's what the hearing is for. Retired Justice John Paul Stevens, who is 98 years old, and there's only 2 people in the history of the court who've served longer on the court than John Paul Stevens. John Paul Stevens has been able to see every televised Supreme Court confirmation hearing in history. And he has seen enough of Brett Kavanaugh, a judge who he once admired. And after seeing Brett Kavanaugh in that hearing room last week, Justice Stevens decided today to take his place in history as the first former Supreme Court justice to ever publicly oppose the confirmation of a nominated Supreme Court justice. And Justice Stevens said that he was offering his opinion today, quote, "for the good of the court." Leading off our discussion now, Lisa Graves, former chief counsel for nominations for the Democrats in the Senate Judiciary Committee and a former deputy assistant attorney general. Also, Mimi Rocha, former federal prosecutor. She's an MSNBC legal contributor. And Ambassador Wendy Sherman, MSNBC global affairs contributor. Ambassador Sherman helped Anita Hill make her way through the Senate confirmation hearing process during the Clarence Thomas confirmation. She is the author of the new book, Not for the Faint of Heart, Lessons in Courage, Power, and Persistence. And Lisa, I want to go to you on this point of Justice Stevens today. I am not aware of any former Supreme Court justice taking a public position in opposition to the nomination of a Supreme Court justice. If it happened somewhere in a distant history that I'm not aware of.
I'm not aware of it either, and I think Justice Stevens has talked about in his writings as a judge and beyond about the really crucial role of the Supreme Court as an impartial tribunal for the rule of law in this country, and for him to call out Judge Kavanaugh is really significant. And as you point out, Lawrence, the fact is that these were his prepared remarks. These were premeditated. These were baseless, really baseless charges of partisanship that were intended to erase the testimony of Dr. Ford, and to suggest that his anger was somehow evidence of his innocence. And he also has made this sort of crocodile tears claim that he was constrained to not speak. Clearly, he can speak whenever he wishes, and he chooses to speak almost entirely through right-wing media outlets, whether it's Fox News or the Wall Street Journal. That's how he chooses to speak, because that's who he is. And when he says that he's going to be the man he's been for 28 years as a lawyer, 16 of those years were as a right-wing political operative before he became a judge. What we saw last week was the mask falling and him revealing who he really is, and in fact, I think who he would be on the court, and that's a stain on that court if he is confirmed.
Wendy Sherman, you've been through the confirmation process as an Undersecretary of State. You know that demeanor is a huge component of what you're doing in that room. People have to know that they're going to feel confident in trusting you in a role like Undersecretary of State, where you're going to be and were in the negotiations with Iran over their nuclear program. You're going to have to be trusted with secrets, all sorts of things. And yes, competence, knowledge, but demeanor is everything.
Demeanor is everything.
I mean, how do you lose sight of that? How can the moment come in a confirmation hearing where you lose your grip on what you know they want to see?
Indeed, I think that Kavanaugh thinks that his righteous indignation shows that he is innocent, and I think his righteous indignation shows that he's trying to divide us and them, to say that Christine Blasey Ford is something else than a real human being, and he's the person who has standing. It is, quite frankly, often a very male approach to power, that righteous indignation, and the president has tried to use that to completely push us apart. We aren't apart. We all care about our sons. We all care about our daughters. But what is so critical, and what wasn't heard in the time of Anita Hill, and hasn't been heard this time either, I'm sorry to say, is the pain, the suffering, and the humiliation that Christine Blasey Ford has had to live with all of her life.
Justice Stevens made an important distinction between Clarence Thomas and Brett Kavanaugh today. Let's listen to that.
There's nothing that Clarence did in the hearings that disqualified him from sitting in cases after he came on the court. He's a very, very decent, likable person, and you cannot help but like Clarence Thomas, which I don't think necessarily would be true of this particular nominee.
Mimi, we all remember Clarence Thomas in the hearing. We all knew that he was angry, and we also knew that he was containing his anger to some degree. And if he felt falsely accused, the anger, of course, is understandable. But what he never did do was raise any kind of political reference to anything that the Democrats were doing in that hearing.
Right, and that's the difference that Justice Stevens is talking about. And he referenced, I think, Professor Tribe's article that he had written about why he believes Brett Kavanaugh, is sort of disqualified, cannot sit properly on the court now. And it's because he was so partisan that there are so many cases that will be before him that have as their parties in the case a political nature or political affiliation. How could anyone who is not affiliated now with a conservative bent or a Republican, the Republican Party, think that they're going to get a fair shot in front of him? And the very definition of a judge, of justice, is people actually having a fair shot and actually believing that, right? We need people to have faith in our judicial institutions, and the only way to do that is if people think that the judge is going to be objective and look at the facts and not rule from emotion. And that's what Brett Kavanaugh showed himself really incapable of doing. He's all emotion. And justified or not, you can't do that as a judge.
And Lisa, it seems the op-ed piece tonight is almost a rushed answer to Justice Stevens today. Certainly none of us saw this coming from Justice Stevens. This was actually a long-scheduled minor event in Florida, kind of a neighborhood event near where he lives, where he was scheduled to speak because a friend invited him to. But the person interviewing him said it felt very deliberate that Justice Stevens wanted, right off the bat in that interview, which I watched in its entirety, wanted to get out there and make this statement. And it seems the White House realized there's got to be a response to this.
It certainly does seem like a scramble to get this out and to use Wall Street Journal as a vehicle to do it. And also, it's the case that Judge Kavanaugh is facing virtually unprecedented opposition by law professors from all backgrounds, right, left, and middle, because of his temperament, because of his behavior at the hearing last week, over a week ago. And I think that what you see now is a nominee who has, in essence, besmirched himself through his actions. And that's even setting aside the record of him lying under oath in his previous hearings about other serious matters. And so by any objective measure, this nomination would be in serious trouble. Unfortunately, we're in this time of tremendous partisanship where people aren't being heard and even witnesses aren't being interviewed by the FBI as part of what should have been a really thorough investigation.
And Wendy, Heidi Heitkamp today, Senator Heitkamp, actually cited Brett Kavanaugh's performance and conduct in the hearing as part of her reason. It's a two-part reason. One is she believes Dr. Ford, but she said Dr. Ford's credibility was actually, in her view, enhanced by Brett Kavanaugh's conduct. So it's actually a joined element. And as the White House lost a very important vote today that included Brett Kavanaugh's conduct as part of the reason, this must be why they've decided we really do have to respond to it.
Yeah, it's really quite extraordinary. The Wall Street Journal article, this being raised by other opinion leaders, McConnell coming out as hard as he possibly can in support of Kavanaugh, really trying to say this is a fait accompli. But you know, Lawrence, the very fact they did this Wall Street Journal article means they're nervous, that they're not sure they've got the votes. So we'll see what tomorrow brings.
Lisa Graves, Mimi Rocah, Wendy Sherman, thank you for starting our discussion tonight. Today's Profile in Courage in the United States Senate. That's coming up. A look at Senator Heidi Heitkamp's decision to cast a vote against Brett Kavanaugh, which could end her Senate career. That's how chancy that vote is. And we'll take a closer look at the FBI investigation that wasn't really an investigation. It was literally the least the FBI could do. We don't know tonight what's in the 46 new pages that the FBI gave to the United States Senate today after its reopened background investigation of Brett Kavanaugh, but we do know that the FBI did not make a serious attempt to investigate the reported attempted rape described by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, because the FBI interviewed only 9 people, and we only know who 6 of those people actually are. But most importantly, we do know that the FBI did not interview Dr. Ford or Brett Kavanaugh, the 2 most important witnesses in that investigation. No Republican senator has expressed any dissatisfaction yet with the FBI investigation. Many Democrats have objected to it. Dr. Ford's lawyers sent a letter to FBI Director Christopher Wray today saying the investigation conducted over the past 5 days is a stain on the process, on the FBI, and on our American ideal of justice. Joining our discussion now, John Heilman, national affairs analyst for NBC News and MSNBC. He is co-host and executive producer of Showtime's The Circus. And Mimi Rocah is still with us. And John, I know you've been in Washington all day. Are you picking up any Republican dissatisfaction with the FBI investigation at all?
No, not really. I think that there's. I think that if you got some people in some very private moments, everyone would kind of acknowledge that this is was not a serious investigation of the kind that you would do if you were really trying to find the truth. This appointments have been made by people who are ex-FBI people and some current FBI people quietly over the course of the last week. I do not think that very many Republicans, possibly even those who pushed for this investigation, ever intended for it to be the kind of investigation that would have been full and amply resourced and ambitious in its ends or its tactics. So I think on the Republican side, at least, for most of them, what they were looking for was cover, and that is what they think. I'm not sure they're right about this on the politics, but at least at the moment, they think they've got the cover that they need to vote yes.
And Mimi Rocah, former federal prosecutor, you've worked with the FBI on real investigations. What should they have done, even within the realm of background investigation? Let's acknowledge that it's different from a criminal investigation that you're directing that could take years or months with a criminal investigation the FBI is running, usually.
Right. Well, and the main difference between the criminal investigation and the background investigation is that a criminal investigation, the FBI really would have free rein to follow leads and do what it thinks is best. Here, because it was a background investigation, they were clearly directed by the White House. I mean, they were literally turning away witnesses that showed up at the offices. The FBI does not normally do that. But
what would normally happen? Because people were, all these Yale roommates and Yale friends of Brett Kavanaugh were struggling all around the country, actually, to try to get their stories to the FBI, and they had sworn statements that some of them tried to physically bring to the FBI. What would the normal receptivity of that be at an FBI office?
I mean, I can't speak for every single FBI, but in my experience, if the FBI is looking into something and the public knows that they're looking into it, first of all, they often put up tip lines.
Yes.
Second of all, if someone shows up at the office or calls and says, I have information, they will listen to them. They may find it completely not credible and then never do any follow-up, but they will, in my experience, hear them out and see if there's anything to be followed up. And here it sounds like, I mean, the reason I think that so many of these people are coming forward and writing articles and speaking to the press, the op-ed today with, his roommates, Kavanaugh's roommates, or drinking buddies, saying, he can't say that he didn't drink to the point of not remembering because we saw him. Why are they doing that in an op-ed or in an opinion piece? Because the FBI didn't hear them out. And that is just strange to me. That relates to the Ramirez claim. But that is something that should have been followed up on if you're going to do a thorough investigation. There's things about Ford's claim. Why didn't they talk to the therapist? I mean, perhaps they did. We don't know. But that is something I would want to talk to every single person she had previously told, made some kind of statement back before all of this began. Those are called prior consistent statements, and they actually carry a lot of weight in the law and in evidence. This isn't a criminal trial, but if they carry weight in a court of criminal law, they should certainly carry some weight in establishing someone's credibility in a background investigation. The bottom line is there were so many ways here to get at was she telling the truth, which, by the way, a lot of people thought she was after they heard her. That's gotten erased. So there were things to do that they didn't do. And most importantly, they really needed to do a probing questioning of Kavanaugh. He has not had that. That hearing was not a questioning. It was essentially him giving a written statement, but orally. I didn't do it. I never did it. That's it. He was not pressed on it. He was not tested with facts about the drinking, which is relevant to the central issue of, because if he admits that he drank too much, he can't say for certain that he didn't commit this assault. So it's all tied together.
Yeah, and John, that point Mimi just made about Brett Kavanaugh's minimizing of his drinking is crucial to his defense because he can't admit that he has any memory lapses because that opens up a theoretical window to does he have a memory lapse about Dr. Ford. And so we have his friends from Yale going to the point of having to get together, write an op-ed piece, right. Charles Ludington, Lynn Brooks, Elizabeth Swisher. They say, we each asserted that Brett lied to the Senate by stating under oath that he never drank to the point of forgetting what he was doing. They all drank with him in college. They all saw him get to that point and beyond.
Yes, and look, I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting about this week, Lawrence, is that given the number of people have now come forward, the number of people who are publicly taking to forums like the ones you just described and others, television, magazine reporters, newspaper reporters, other people, to try to get their stories out, is that it does point to one of the calculations that Mitch McConnell and his friends on the Republican side in the Senate have made that I think may be an error, which is that they believe, and they have a lot of reasons to believe this over time, that getting Judge Kavanaugh onto the court will bring this all to an end. In the end, that all that matters is winning. If they get to 50 and then get Mike Pence and get him on the court, that this will all go away. I think as a political matter, that may not be true. And that what may happen over the course of the weeks ahead, putting aside even the longer term questions about is Judge Kavanaugh potentially impeached by a Democratic House if Democrats take back the House, which could happen just in the period of time between now and the midterms. This story, I don't think, goes away. We may continue to hear from these people, from more of these people, and have more newspaper articles, more magazine articles, more news and more television segments done on it. So the political damage could continue continue well beyond, even if they successfully do get him on the court on Saturday. But I will say lastly that one of the things that Mitch McConnell has proceeded on forever, one of the basic political truths of Mitch McConnell's life is that he never pays a political price for process violations. And so this FBI investigation, the way in which this whole thing has been handled, that is an internalized belief of his. So we'll see whether that turns out to be true, but he has a lot of history behind him that tells him that do whatever you need to do in terms of process, take all those complaints and get the W on the board.
I want to just close this segment by giving the last word on Brett Kavanaugh's drinking to his Yale roommate, James Roach. Let's listen to what he had to say.
It surprised me a lot to hear him say that he never blacked out because, I would be in the room and he would come down and he was slurring and he was yelling and making loud noises and, very drunk.
John Heilemann, Mimi Roker, thank you for joining our discussion. We're going to take a quick break here. Judge Kavanaugh has opened a new gulf between Republicans and the truth. You thought it couldn't get any bigger.
How did we get from a chorus of expert praise and professional respect to wild tales of violent gangs, sexual assault rings, fistfights on boats in Rhode Island harbors, and the possibility, get this, of an argument in a college bar? An argument in a college bar?
That is the way Republicans believe they have to lie about Brett Kavanaugh's history. Brett Kavanaugh is the only Supreme Court nominee that we know of who got in a bar fight while he was at Yale, a fight that had to be stopped by the New Haven police. Brett Kavanaugh managed to get his name on the New Haven Police Department police report of that bar fight. Police don't get called for arguments that happen in bars. Police get called for fights that happen in bars. There's a big difference. But what Mitch McConnell obviously believes is that any accurate description of what we know about Brett Kavanaugh's proven out-of-control drunken behavior in high school or college hurts Brett Kavanaugh's chances for confirmation. And so Mitch McConnell can't bring himself to say one honest word about that. Joining our discussion now, Ron Klain, former chief counsel for the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he was also a former chief of staff to Vice Presidents Joe Biden and Al Gore, and a former senior aide to President Obama. Lisa Graves, also a former staffer of the Senate Judiciary Committee, is back with us. And Ron, Mitch McConnell just cannot handle the truth on this one, so he just has to take everything and minimize it, mischaracterize it, describe it as something that it wasn't.
Yeah, Lawrence, this is the contagion of the Trump era. The president lies, and then it makes other Republicans lie. The president's lies led to Judge Kavanaugh's toxic performance before the Judiciary Committee last week, where he was really trying to appeal to Trump not to pull his nomination. And then today you see Susan Collins and Jeff Flake saying that FBI investigation was, quote unquote, very thorough. Well, it was a lot of things, but there's really no human being who believes it was very thorough. We just got a contagion of lying spreading through the Republican Party, launched by Donald Trump, and others are just following along in his example.
Lisa Graves, I'm wondering, since Jeff Flake was the one who stopped the train and really forced this investigation, I'm wondering if Jeff Flake sees this investigation as an insult to him, because this really is Mitch McConnell making sure that the investigation was literally the least that the FBI could do. It's hard for me to imagine that a senator who had a serious demand would accept a result like this in response to his demand.
Well, it really makes you wonder, because last week I and others were applauding him for saying we needed to have this follow-up investigation, and yet his remarks today indicate that he found this investigation to be thorough, even though it plainly is not. I would be surprised that if Jeff Flake is willing to go along with approving Brett Kavanaugh and letting there be basically an asterisk of illegitimacy for every single decision that Judge Kavanaugh makes if he's confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court. That's the opposite of what Jeff Flake has said he stands for and what he's looking for in terms of this country healing and of this court being legitimate.
And Ron, the Wall Street Journal op-ed tonight under Brett Kavanaugh's name is going straight at the temperament issue. That's what the whole op-ed is about. There's a lot of blather in there that's irrelevant, but it all comes down to those lines that about this, saying this is who I'm going to be from this point forward. And that is aimed at Jeff Flake, who's one of the Republicans who voiced a real problem with the behavior that he saw from Brett Kavanaugh in the hearing room last week.
Well, that's right, Lawrence. But I think, as your guest said earlier tonight, the problem isn't that appearance before the Judiciary Committee was not who Brett Kavanaugh was. The problem was that it's exactly who Brett Kavanaugh is. And he let his partisanship show. I don't mind him being angry. I understand why he was upset by the circumstance he was in. But on a premeditated statement, he attacked the Democrats, he attacked left-wing groups, he attacked the Clintons. There's just no way that people can get fair justice for the Supreme Court if Brett Kavanaugh is the swing vote on that court.
We just saw in the Brett Kavanaugh's Yale roommate on video, on television, saying that, yes, of course, there were times when he was blacked out drunk. Let's go back to the hearing room to see the way Brett Kavanaugh handled that question and his demeanor in the face of that question.
So you're saying there's never been a case where you drank so much that you didn't remember what happened the night before or part of what happened?
You're asking about, blackout. I don't know. Have you?
Could you answer the question, Judge? That's not happened. Is that your answer?
Yeah, and I'm curious if you have.
I have no drinking problem, Judge.
Lisa, it's hard to think of a worse answer.
I don't think you could actually script a worse answer for him, and I think that's precisely why he's doing this late mea culpa, even though it's not a real apology. If he was really sorry, he would have apologized last Friday or Saturday or Sunday or any day this week. He's only doing it now on the brink of this vote because there's been so much justified criticism at his plain partisanship and his lack of temperament.
And Ron, we all noticed that when he came back from a break, he did apologize to Senator Klobuchar for that particular exchange. And so he was advised that he dug himself such a deep hole in that particular exchange that it needed to be fixed as best it could be actually in the hearing room that day.
That's right. I mean, that is the difference, right? We all say things we regret, and in that case, Judge Kavanaugh apologized. What he said at the confirmation hearing, his opening statement, wasn't something he regretted. It's something he did on purpose to rally Republican voters, to rally Donald Trump. And now on the eve of the vote, he may need an extra vote or two. He's willing to write a Wall Street Journal op-ed to get that vote back. That's not an apology. That's not fixing some mistake he made. That's trying to have it both ways on both being a partisan in the hearing and then just trying to get over that line at the finish line.
Ron Klain and Lisa Graves, who have more experience with Senate confirmation hearings of Supreme Court justices than any two people we could gather here. Thank you both very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you.
And coming up, one of those rare moments in the United States Senate today, a profile in courage. It is hard being a Democrat running statewide in North Dakota, so hard that North Dakota has only one statewide elected Democrat. That is Senator Heidi Heitkamp, who told the voters of North Dakota today something that most of them did not want to hear.
I will be voting no on Judge Kavanaugh.
Senator Heitkamp announced that decision on North Dakota TV today, where she has been facing TV ads like this.
The liberal mob and their media allies tried to ruin a good man with smears.
You have replaced advice and consent with search and destroy.
Judge Kavanaugh fought back, clearing his name, defending his honor. Now Senator Heitkamp has a choice. Stand with President Trump, Judge Kavanaugh, and all who thought this was a national disgrace, or stand with them. Tell Heidi Heitkamp you'll never forget how she votes.
Polls show Heidi Heitkamp trailing in her re-election campaign to her Republican challenger, but she says she kept politics out of her decision.
You know, the easiest thing in the world for me would have been take a yes vote, get this over with. That would presumably be make my path to re-election easier. I didn't come here to do the easy thing. I came here to do the right thing.
Senator Heitkamp offered 2 reasons she is voting against Brett Kavanaugh. The first is that she believes Dr. Christine Blasey Ford.
I believe Dr. Ford. I believe her story. I found her testimony to be incredibly credible, and I found his presentation to lack the impartiality and the judicial temperament that I have come to expect from a Supreme Court justice.
Politically brave votes are rare in the United States Senate. Sometimes years pass without seeing one from either party. Today, Senator Heitkamp had another senator's words in mind when she made her decision.
There's a quote from Robert Kennedy, and it is, you know, when you make decisions about what you're going to do in your life, it's history will judge you, but more importantly, you'll judge yourself.
Here is the full text of that passage of a 1966 speech by Senator Robert Kennedy that Senator Heitkamp quoted today. History will judge you, and as the years pass, you will ultimately judge yourself on the extent to which you've used your gifts to lighten and enrich the lives of your fellow man. In your hands is the future of your world and the fulfillment of the best qualities of your own spirit. Heidi Heitkamp might lose her Senate seat because of her vote on this nomination. She knows that. She is prepared for that defeat. But for the strong, defeat is never the end of hope. And there is no better example of that than the one given by Robert Kennedy in the one speech that he ever delivered in North Dakota in 1963 when he was the Attorney General of the United States. Bobby Kennedy traveled to Bismarck to deliver a speech to the National Congress of American Indians. And he ended that speech with a quote from Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce tribe. It was a speech that Chief Joseph gave at the most difficult time of his life in 1877 when he surrendered to the United States Army. In that darkest moment, Chief Joseph chose optimism. He described what America could be if he and his people were allowed to be free in their own land. And Chief Joseph said that he was waiting and praying for a time when, he said, we shall all be alike, brothers of one father and one mother, with one sky above us and one country around us and one government for all. In my experience, for most politicians, this is a trick question. What would you not do to win an election? They don't really have an answer, most of them. Today we discovered the answer to that question from Heidi Heitkamp. She will not cast the easy political vote for a North Dakota senator. Instead, she's going to vote against the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh. Wendy Sherman is back with us. And Wendy, when I see votes like this, it really stops me because it is so rare and in this case, so important.
You know, we've all talked about who's going to be the next John McCain, who's going to be the person to have an independent mind. And I certainly didn't agree with Senator McCain on many, many issues. But when he put that thumbs down on the health care vote, that was courageous. He was courageous, obviously, in many ways in his life. What Heidi Heitkamp did today was truly courageous. And I think what's really sweet is her brother, in talking about it, said, when she brushes her teeth in the morning, which is totally North Dakota, very specific, right? Yeah. When she brushes her teeth in the morning, she wants to be able to look in the mirror and know that it's her and who she is. And I give her enormous credit. There are going to be lots of pundits who are going to say she did this for political reasons. They're going to say, well, she knew she was going to lose, so she threw caution to the wind. I don't believe that at all. I think she did it because she has heard from so many sexual assault victims for all the reasons she said in her comments. And my understanding is that her website tonight is exploding, that her fundraising has gone through the roof. And none of that, I think that'll be great, and I'd love her to be back in the Senate, obviously. But she's got to feel tonight authentically herself. And you can't be more powerful than that.
And the backroom truth that the public doesn't really know about this is that within the party, the Democratic leader of the Senate, or Republican leader of the Senate for that matter, always wants the senator to cast the vote that will get her reelected. The most important thing is having that Democratic seat. That's more important to the Democratic leader of the Senate than the outcome of any particular vote, including this one. And so they definitely are free on these votes. They can go in whatever direction they want.
Yeah, it totally matters to the leader what people are going to do. What I think is so tragic about this whole thing, besides the personal cost to Dr. Blasey Ford and to all the victims out there, and I feel for Brett Kavanaugh's kids and his wife. This is tough going. But what really matters here is where we're headed and who we are and what we're about. The quote that you used from the chief, we're all part of one country. We're a part of one family. This is what I think Heidi Heitkamp had in mind tonight, a larger cause, bigger than herself. What's real and important.
Ambassador Wendy Sherman, thank you very much for joining us this important discussion tonight. Tonight's last word is next. Time for tonight's last word.
Republicans are planning to keep the results of the FBI's investigation of Brett Kavanaugh a secret and store them in a locked vault. Well, he sounds innocent to me. That's what you do. Nothing in there.
And we saw something in the Senate today that we've never seen before. We have seen celebrities come to the Senate to testify, but we have not seen celebrities get detained or arrested for protesting at the Senate. And today that happened to Amy Schumer, who happens to be the cousin of the minority leader of the United States Senate, Chuck Schumer. And we have never seen that happen before, that the cousin of the minority leader is detained and arrested in the Senate by the Capitol Police while protesting the actions of the United States Senate.
Hey everyone, it's MSNBC's Chris Hayes. Thanks for listening. Now, I want to invite you to talk to us. What do you love about your favorite podcasts from MSNBC and NBC News? What can we do better? We want to hear from you. Text podcast to 66866, and we'll text you a link to a short survey so you can tell us what you think. Again, text the word podcast to 66866. Standard text messaging rates apply. We're always striving to do better, and your opinion really helps. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Hello, I'm Mark Evan Jackson from NBC's The Good Place, and host of the official and appropriately titled The Good Place, the podcast, where guests like Kristen Bell, Ted Danson, and Mike Schur talk about everything on and off screen. Subscribe and listen free on your favorite podcast app.